CBS Radio started roughly 1929. It featured entertainment, did not have a news division until the mid-1930s. That news division was created by William S. Paley, president of CBS, to, quote, enhance the prestige of CBS to make it seem in the public mind the more advanced, dignified, and socially aware network, unquote. And so it did. We want to celebrate what listening to CBS News over the radio meant to journalism by bringing to you memorable moments in its long, distinguished history. We start tonight with radio coverage of the 1932 Republican National Convention. This was something completely new. Americans huddled around a radio at home or in their apartment, listening to the raucous events at a national political convention. The date, June 14th, 1932.
There is no greater patriotism than the employment of every effort towards the restoration of normal conditions. And there can be no more dependable means to this end than the reelection of Herbert Hoover as president.
Ladies and gentlemen of the radio audience, the keynote speech is finished. The delegates, 1,154 of them, are standing up, not wildly enthusiastic, but demonstrating nevertheless. The California banner is being waved to and fro. California's standard is raised high, and the keynoter is being congratulated by the chairman, Senator Simeon D. Fest. The keynoter was L.J. Dickinson, hell-raising Dick, as they called him. At the end, he really broke out of a lethargic way of producing the speech, which was prepared and written, of course, and which was read by him by, more or less, we might say, extemporaneously, including in there his own personal conviction and driving home his points. He is going to speak again, but ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the conclusion of our convention broadcast, and so we're going to notify you that first, Frederick William Weil will give you an analysis of what has happened to this point at exactly 2:30 o'clock New York time, which will be 1/2 hour hence on every radio set throughout the entire United States. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that gives me exactly 30 seconds to give you a resume of what has happened. We have been broadcasting from the Chicago Stadium, the convention hall of the Republican National Committee and the National Convention. The convention was called to order by the Honorable Simeon D. Fest, Chairman of the Republican National Committee. The prayer was by the Right Reverend James E. Freeman, Bishop of Washington. The call for the convention was read by George de Benneville Time of New Jersey, Secretary of the Republican National Committee, and the keynoter was Senator L.J. Dickinson of Iowa, who made the keynote speech. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Ted Husing. This is the Columbia Broadcasting System.
1/2 hour hence on every radio set throughout the United States. There is a timeless, time capsule beauty to that phraseology. We bring you the radio sound of the end of World War II. That cataclysmic conflict, listen to me now, left 50 million to 55 million dead as a direct result of the war. Another 19 million to 28 million people died as a result of war-related famine and disease. Taken together, 3% of the world's population perished. The war's end, therefore, was earth-shattering news, and most people heard it first on radio. CBS News broke into regular entertainment programming with this bulletin.
Japan has signed the documents of surrender. In Tokyo Bay, aboard the battleship Missouri, the Japanese foreign minister put his signature to the paper ending the Second World War. This is Bob Trout in New York, switching you first to the USS Ancon.
Attention, the peoples of the world. World War II is about to come to its official closing. We're on the Pacific Fleet flagship USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay for the signing of the surrender of Japan. 3 years, 8 months, and 25 days since the attack on Pearl Harbor. We are 3,700 miles from there, but we have come much further than that by way of the Central Pacific, New Guinea, the Marianas, and the Philippines. The Japanese delegation has just arrived. Military men in formal military uniform and dignitaries, civilian dignitaries in formal attire. Lined up before us are more officers and men with high-ranking stars and the gold braid than has been assembled in this bay for many a long time. The deck of the Missouri stretches out before us. We're on the veranda deck. Its great guns are pointed skyward to allow more room for the Army, Navy, Marines, and the representatives of the nations who are here. The United States of China, the United Kingdom, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, Australia, Canada, France, Netherlands, and New Zealand.
The CBS correspondent briefly summarized those on deck of the battleship Missouri, with special attention paid to American prisoners of war just released who were witnessing Japan's surrender. We pick up the coverage.
Planes have been flying overhead. The day is quite cloudy. A mist surrounding the mountains that come down to form Tokyo Bay. Before us here are flags. Oh, here comes the Supreme Commander of the Allied Forces, General of the Army, Douglas MacArthur. With him, Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz and other dignitaries.
General MacArthur is now facing the microphones. He is about to start his speech, which explains the signing surrender and also calls
representatives of the major warring powers to conclude a solemn agreement.
That was the sound of VJ Day, victory over Japan, and the end of World War II, as carried on radio by CBS News. Proud to bring that to you. One of the most important journalists in CBS News history is, of course, Edward R. Murrow. We still have pictures of him in our hallways. Murrow was foundational to CBS News for a lot of reasons, but he will always be most remembered for his coverage of the prelude, the onslaught, and the horrors of World War II. In due course, I promise, we will have clips of Murrow from that harrowing era of news coverage on the radio. But first, we wanted to share something bouncier, something before the ravages of World War II engulfed the world. What you're about to hear is a clip from 1937 from a show called Saturday Night Swing Club. Murrow is not the host, but he is a narrator of one of the musical interludes. The show's announcer, for those really curious, was another famous radio name, Mel Allen. Remember, this was a time when radio was the dominant entertainment medium across all economic classes, and it was experimenting at this time with new technology, wires and frequencies that could span great distances, uniting performers and audiences across, for example, a vast ocean. Listen.
And so we say goodnight to Stéphane Grappelli and Yango Reinhardt and their quintet of the Hot Club of France. They have been playing for you from the Brick-Top Cabaret in Montmartre, Paris. This is Ed Murrow speaking and saying, swing it, America.
Swing it, America. That's an order from the takeout. I told you Friday we would share moments from Edward R. Murrow and World War II. This is from D-Day, an epic moment for the Western world and for CBS journalists.
There is no official admission that our bridgehead is free from concentrated artillery fire. But the general impression is that we are now in a position to start pouring the material ashore, the tanks and the self-propelled artillery. Incidentally, they're all waterproofed for traveling in water up to 6 feet. Eyewitness accounts indicate that all movement has ceased in the area of the attack. The roads and rails carry no traffic. That means that the bombers can now start working further inland. Here is a report from Charles Collingwood, Columbia's correspondent with the Navy, who was with a tank landing craft. He says the first craft onto the beaches were the little LCVPs. They came in doggedly, looking very small and gallant with their heads up. Offshore, several miles, loomed the silhouettes of the big ships. Between them and the beaches milled an assemblage of landing craft of all kinds, forming up, waiting to go in. A few thousand yards offshore, 2 patrol boats stood, a mile or so apart. They marked the starting line. They were just out of range of effective machine gun fire.
On those boats, each wave of landing craft dressed like a unit of foot soldiers and were then dispatched to the beach. As each wave went in, a new group of landing craft advanced to the starting. When their turn came, they too went in. Some of the men moved off to find and fight the enemy, destroy his guns, push him back from the beach. Others stayed at the water's edge to signal in the landing craft. Full supply. More and more men reached the beach. Boats kept coming in, landing their men, then backing off the shore and going back for another load. The enemy guns began firing. At one end of the beachhead, a little knot of German prisoners began to form. Back among the big ships, the admiral decided he could now send in his bigger landing vessels, send them into the shore. The LCIs and the LSTs sidled to the starting line and then headed for the beach.
I can do no better than what you just heard. I can only aspire to the same clarity, accuracy, and immediacy of this historic journalism. To honor the visit of King Charles, we bring you CBS News radio coverage of the coronation of the King's mother, Queen Elizabeth II. It was the first coronation carried on television. Britons watched it live, but film had to be flown to America for later broadcast. That meant radio was first, with word pictures that met a moment of royal grandeur.
This is the coronation. This is the big day in London. This is the great spectacle of the Middle Ages, transforming the world's biggest city into a setting from a fairy tale, splashed with the colors of scarlet and gold, and ringing with the tramp of military boots, the rattling of sword and bayonet, the blare of trumpets, and the clatter of horses' hoofs. This is the day that the young lady named Elizabeth Alexandra Mary is crowned Elizabeth II by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland and her other realms and territories. Queen, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith. This is Robert Trout speaking from the center of London, the broadcasting platform high up on the side of the Middlesex Guildhall, opposite Westminster Abbey, where William the Conqueror was crowned nearly 900 years ago, and where today the solemn ceremonies of the coronation are to be acted out before 7,000 privileged guests, mostly peers and peeresses of the realm, in the robes of state, crimson with collars of white fur. Since not long after dawn, the nobles have been in their places inside the Abbey, waiting through the long hours for the great moment when they will place their coronets upon their heads and fill the great church with their cry, "God save Queen Elizabeth, long live Queen Elizabeth, may the Queen live forever."
The sky that morning, dull, gray, the temperatures chilly. Crowds in the tens of thousands waited through rain for 2 days for an event that required 14 months of preparation.
At the moment, I can see the last of the coaches that have brought the princes and princesses of the blood royal standing there before the annex, about to move along. There remains now the last of the processions, the procession from Buckingham Palace. And so for the magical moment when the Queen reveals herself to her capital city on the way to her crowning, we switch from Westminster Abbey to our Canada Gate position outside Buckingham Palace, and to the voice of Edward R. Murrow.
Now we are on the Victoria Memorial, directly in front of Buckingham Palace. It's a surly, uncertain sort of day. The royal standard stands stiff in the breeze. The clouds are rather low-hanging. It was on exactly a day such as this that German dive bomber came down through the barrage balloon and hit the northeast corner of the plane. For the last 2 hours, we have been standing here watching the departure of the rulers of the colonies, then the prime ministers of the dominions, Sir Winston Churchill and Lady Churchill. Sir Winston without his cigar, wearing the uniform of the Lord Warden of the Cinque Ports. I can see just through the archway now the royal carriage. It's standing quite silent. Now coming through the center arch is a detachment of the household cavalry. Burnished breastplates, white plumes, black horses. Moving very slowly. So far, we have not seen a man thrown here today, although one Air Chief Marshal had a guardsman holding, or rather leading, his horse. Look
Looking in the opposite direction, we can look about 3/4 of a mile down the Mall to Admiralty Arch. And for the last 35 minutes, guardsmen have been flowing down there like a red river between green banks. Just directly in front of us now, at this end of the Mall, about 50 yards away, we can see the yeomen of the guard and the Queen's bargemen lined up. There is a thin scarlet line of guardsmen on both sides of the Mall. And along the edges of the stands here, the stands being painted blue, there are red geraniums, exactly the same color as the guardsmen's tunics.
Radio, by its very nature, is a theater of the mind experience. As you listen, you imagine what's happening. That's why the word pictures of CBS correspondents have been and remain compelling. But tonight, no word pictures required. Our clip tonight is also a nod to the visit here in New York right now of King Charles and Queen Camilla. This is the sound of the bells of Big Ben in London, ringing in the new year. That new year? 1933. Let the sound wash over you. You might even want to close your eyes and imagine a bygone past coming back to us now.
We have listened to an echo of 1933 as it burst upon our sister nation across the sea. In London, Big Ben has rung out the old year and rung in the new. This presentation was announced by Paul Douglas. This is the Columbia Broadcasting System.
As you saw in some of those still photographs, Big Ben was undergoing some renovations. The bells, though, loud as ever, and brought to American homes in a new way by CBS Radio in 1933. I promise, I really promise, we will get to CBS News radio coverage that is chronologically closer to our contemporary times. But I am featuring CBS radio news coverage from the 1930s and the 1940s because it recorded, for all time and for the first time in this new medium, world-altering events. So much so that CBS created the World News Roundup, which came to be the longest-running network radio news broadcast in history. What you're about to hear is the first such broadcast. The date, March 13th, 1938, and it captured the fall of Austria to Nazi Germany and all that would portend.
Tonight, the world trembles, torn by conflicting forces. Throughout this day, event has crowded upon event in tumultuous Austria. Meanwhile, the outside world, gravely shaken by the Austrian crisis, moves cautiously through a maze of diplomatic perils. Since the German troops crossed the Austrian border on the historic invasion last Friday, news has flowed across the Atlantic in a steady stream. The German chancellor now winds his way through the conquered nation in a parade of triumph to end in a tremendous spectacle in Vienna. As German troops swarm across frontiers in their first offensive since 1914, momentous decisions are being reached in the capitals outside Germany. And so the world spotlight, for 3 days fastened upon Austria, is shared tonight by London's tiny Downing Street, by the Quai d'Orsay, whose buildings of state line the Seine River in Paris, by other chancelleries throughout the world. To bring you the picture of Europe tonight, Columbia now presents a special broadcast which will include pickups direct from London, from Paris, and such other European capitals as at this late hour abroad have communication channels available. This is Bob Trout speaking to you from New York, opening Columbia's shortwave transatlantic program to cover the key cities of Europe. But before switching to our first European capital, let us look once again at the latest news bulletins with swift, fresh details of a Europe in turmoil. From the Press Radio Bureau comes a summary written from news supplied by the Associated Press, the United Press, and the International News Service. And here's a quick glimpse of the critical situation in Central Europe. Right at this moment, Austria is no longer a nation, but is now officially a part of the German Empire. Austria and Germany are being welded together under one command, one army, one policy, one economic compact. The Nazis are driving with all their might to bring Austria under complete Nazi domination.
The World News Roundup went first to London, then to Paris, for it was France that felt the tremors of war more directly and with greater trepidation.
For news from Paris itself, flashed across the Atlantic from the French capital, we turn to the voice of Edgar Murrow, Chicago Daily News European correspondent since the World War. A Pulitzer Prize winner, Mr. Murrow is now head of the Paris bureau of the Chicago Daily News. We take you now to Paris, France.
Hello, America. This is Paris calling. Here is Edgar A. Murrow.
With the invasion and conquest of Austria, the true nature of German policy has, in French eyes, become completely clear. Nazi Germany has thrown off the mask. Its aim is revealed, not the innocent and inevitable search for some theoretical equality, the famous Gleichberechtigung, but a bid for the mastery of Europe, a mastery to be based neither on productivity nor on civilization, but on brutal, naked force.
Nazi Germany had thrown off the mask, brutal force, the aim, mastery of Europe, fearful times to come. It was all too real and present on radio sets across America because of CBS. In the 20th century, no event rocked America more than the surprise Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. What you're about to hear is a very particular part of vital radio coverage of that day, December 7th, 1941. It is a frantic military order issued via radio to all civilians on the inhabited Hawaiian Islands, at the time a territory of the United States and, importantly, home to the U.S. Navy's Pacific Fleet. This bulletin carried by CBS station KGMB.
We'll be on the air only a few minutes. Everybody listen carefully throughout the territory of Hawaii. Special announcement. We'll be on the air only a few minutes. Everybody throughout the territory of Hawaii, turn on your radios loud so that your neighbors can hear it. We have a special announcement. We'll be on the air for only a few minutes. Here is the announcement. A statement by Lieutenant General Walter C. Short, Commanding General of the Hawaiian Department. Quote, Governor Poindexter has just proclaimed martial law. All civilian governmental agencies will continue to function under the governor. Today, the Hawaiian Islands were attacked by Japanese airplanes. Although a state of war exists, the civilian population of these islands has reacted in a calm and satisfactory manner. The Army demands the aid and assistance of every person in the territory. If you are ordered by military personnel to obey a certain command, that order must be obeyed instantly and without question. Avoid the slightest appearance of hostility, either in word or in act. Certain enemy agents have been apprehended and detained. Civilians who go about their regular duties have nothing to fear. All citizens are warned to watch their actions carefully, for any infraction of military rules and regulations will bring swift and harsh reprisals. Prisoners, when captured, will be turned over to the nearest military patrol, military guardhouse, police patrol, or police station. Information regarding suspicious persons will be telephoned to the Provost Marshal at Honolulu, telephone number 2948. Provost Marshal, 2948 is his phone number. A complete blackout of the entire territory will go into effect at nightfall tonight. Anyone violating the blackout by showing a light will be summarily dealt with. All civilian traffic, except in cases of direct emergency, will cease at dark. In this emergency, I assure you that the armed forces are adequately dealing with the situation and that each and every one of you can best serve his country by giving his wholehearted cooperation to the military and civilian government. Further instructions regarding civilians will be issued as need arise. Keep your head and do your duty as Americans. Statement by Lieutenant General Walter C. Short, Commanding General, Hawaiian Department. I will repeat it, and then we will leave the air.
Radio, carrying the most urgent and important declarations in the immediate aftermath of the attack on Pearl Harbor. It was the only way to communicate broadly at the time. And as you heard, it was not continuous. The radio signal did not last long. The power of radio in a moment of peril. You know I love baseball. And if you love baseball, as I do, you must revere the Bambino. George Herman Babe Ruth was, until Shohei Ohtani came along, unquestionably the greatest baseball player ever, and it's not close. He was also, the Babe, a larger-than-life figure full of humor, wisecracks, and warmth. He also ate ravenously, drank heavily, and smoked as many as, believe it or not, pause, take this in, 20 cigars a day. Early in his career, the Babe was a stellar pitcher and later became the game's most feared, famous, and celebrated home run hitter. Here's the Babe with CBS in 1939.
Babe, you've had more publicity than the Prince of Wales. You like it?
Well, I'll tell you about that. I wouldn't be human if I didn't like small write-ups for my home runs. But I don't like the papers to say that I see sick and crippled kids to get my name in the headlines. That's all wrong. I'm strong for the kids. I know them, and they know me. Publicity can't make a fellow smack the old apple or play good ball. If he does that, he'll get publicity anyway.
I saw a flock of autograph hunters around you the other day like flies around a sugar bowl. You must get a lot of writing practice.
I sure do. I put the old Hancock on everything they push in front of me except blank checks. Baseballs, books, gosh, everything. Someday I'll be signing socks.
No one but Shohei Ohtani today could even carry the Babe's socks. I'm going to guess almost none of you have ever heard of Studio 9. Until I started wading through the archives of CBS News Radio, I hadn't heard of it either. Studio 9, though, it is no exaggeration to say, was the birthplace of CBS News. The studio from which voices that made CBS News on the radio famous came from Studio 9. It was a place that began knitting the world together via reportage over radio waves. Now, Studio 9 was due to close in the summer of 1964. And correspondent Robert Trout, a voice I hope you have become familiar with in these tributes, organized a farewell. And here is how it began.
The voices of Studio 9. Edward R. Murrow on a London rooftop during the Blitz.
This is London.
I'm standing again tonight looking out over London. In the course of the last 15 or 20 minutes, there's been considerable action up here.
Charles Collingwood describing the German surrender.
General Jodl said in a voice that choked and almost broke, "With this signature, the German people and the German armed forces are, for better or worse, delivered into the victor's hands. In this war, which has lasted..."
H.V. Kaltenborn speculating about a third term for FDR.
Good evening, everybody. There has been a contest of wits between the President of the United States and the Washington reporters. They have sought to make him tell what he intends to do about a third term. He has sought by...
Eric Severide recalling the fall of France.
The life just simply ran out of the city. It was like a beautiful woman lying in a coma, with the lifeblood just draining out through every vein, every street. I noticed a one-way...
Those are the voices of CBS Radio News, Studio 9. Those and others like Elmer Davis, William L. Shirer, John Daly, and Alan Jackson, who through the dark days of Hitler's march through Europe and World War II, through the 50s and now the 60s, brought the living history of the world through Studio 9 and into the living rooms of the nation. Tonight they bid farewell to Studio 9.
Farewell to Studio 9, an affectionate goodbye to the birthplace of CBS News. Here is CBS News correspondent Robert Trout.
I am speaking to you from Studio 9. As broadcasting facilities go, this one is not remarkable at all. It's just a soundproofed room, 15 by 20, surrounded on two sides by glass-encased control rooms. On the third, it looks out into the clutter of the CBS newsroom. It's not the handsomest radio studio, not the most modern, not lovely at all. But for those who have worked here, it has a charm all its own. We shall miss it.
The living history of the world, indeed.
Edward R. Murrow brought listeners to the front lines of World War II, and tonight we have his famed 1943 broadcast aboard an Allied bombing run over Berlin. 5 radio correspondents went on the mission, but Murrow was one of only 2 who survived. Here's some of his report.
CBS World News now brings you a special broadcast from London. Columbia's correspondent Edward R. Murrow was on one of the RAF bombing planes that smashed at Berlin last night in one of the heaviest attacks of the war. 41 bombers were lost in the raid, and 3 out of the 5 correspondents who flew with the raiders failed to return. For Mr. Murrow's story of the attack, we take you now to London.
This is London. Yesterday afternoon, the waiting was over. The weather was right. The target was to be the big city. The crew captains walked into the briefing room, looked at the maps and charts, and sat down with their big celluloid pads on their knees. The atmosphere was that of a school and a church. The weatherman gave us the weather. The pilots were reminded that Berlin is Germany's greatest center of war production. The intelligence officer told us how many heavy and light ack-ack guns, how many searchlights we might expect to encounter. By this time, we were about 30 miles from our target area in Berlin. That 30 miles was the longest flight I have ever made. Dead on time, Buzz, the bomb aimer, reported target indicators going down. At the same moment, the sky ahead was lit up by bright yellow flares. Off to starboard, another kite went down in flames. The flares were sprouting all over the sky, reds and greens and yellows, and we were flying straight for the center of the fireworks. D-Dog seemed to be standing still, the 4 propellers thrashing the air, but we didn't seem to be closing in. The cloud had cleared, and off to the starboard, a lank was caught by at least 14 searchlight beams. We could see him twist and turn and finally break out, but still the whole thing had a quality of unreality about it. No one seemed to be shooting at us, but it was getting lighter all the time. Suddenly, a tremendous big blob of yellow light appeared dead ahead, another to the right and another to the left. We were flying straight for them. Jock pointed out to me the dummy fires and flares to right and left, but we kept going in. Dead ahead, there was a whole chain of red flares, looking like stoplights. Another lank was coned on our starboard beam. The light seemed to be supporting it. Again, we could see those little bubbles of colored lead driving at it from 2 sides. The German fighters were at him. And then, with no warning at all, D-Dog was filled with an unhealthy white light. I was standing just behind Jock and could see all the seams on the wings. His quiet Scots voice beat into my ears. "Steady, lads, we've been coned." His slender body lifted, half out of the seat, as he jammed the control column forward and to the left. We were going down. Jock was wearing woolen gloves with the fingers cut off. I could see his fingernails turn white as he gripped the wheel. And then I was on my knees, flat on the deck, where he had whipped the dog back into a climbing turn. The knees should have been strong enough to support me, but they weren't. And the stomach seemed in some danger of letting me down, too. I picked myself up and looked out again. It seemed that one big searchlight, instead of being 20,000 feet below, was mounted right on our wingtip. D-Dog was corkscrewing. As we rolled down on the other side, I began to see what was happening to Berlin. The clouds were gone, and the sticks of incendiaries from the preceding waves made the place look like a badly laid-out city with the streetlights on. The small incendiaries were going down like a fistful of white rice thrown on a piece of black velvet. As Jock hauled the dog up again, I was thrown to the other side of the cockpit, and there below were more incendiaries, glowing white and then turning red. The cookies,
The 4,000-pound high explosives were bursting below like great sunflowers gone mad. And then as we started down again, still held in the light, I remembered that the dog still had one of those cookies and a whole basket of incendiaries in his belly, and the light still held it. And I was very frightened.
For 13 days in October 1962, the world stood on the brink of nuclear war as the U.S. and the Soviet Union feuded over Soviet missiles stored in Cuba, just off the coast of Florida. CBS News Radio program was interrupted with a special bulletin.
We interrupt this program. We have interrupted this program for a CBS Radio Net Alert Bulletin.
We take you now to the White House in Washington. George Herman reporting.
The White House has indicated that the Cuban missile sites under surveillance by the United States are continuing to grow in size and in strength. An official White House statement says this: the development of ballistic missile sites in Cuba continues at a rapid pace. Through the process of continued surveillance directed by the President, additional evidence has been acquired which clearly reflects that as of Thursday, October 25th, definite buildups in these offensive missile sites continued to be made. Activity at these sites apparently is directed at achieving a full operational capability as soon as possible. And the White House statement goes on.
The Soviet Union was looking to deter any other attempts from the U.S. to overthrow Cuba's communist leader, Fidel Castro. The U.S. argued it couldn't engage in talks under the Soviets' nuclear threat. Here's how the negotiations were described.
Several inconsistent and conflicting proposals have been made by the USSR within the last 24 hours, including the one just made public in Moscow. The proposal broadcast this morning involves the security of nations outside of the Western Hemisphere. But it is the Western Hemisphere countries, and they alone, that are subject to the threat that has been produced by the current crisis, the action of the Soviet government in secretly introducing offensive weapons into Cuba. Work on these offensive weapons is still proceeding at a rapid pace. The first imperative, says the White House statement, the first imperative must be to deal with this immediate threat under which no sensible negotiation can proceed. It is therefore the position of the United States that as an urgent preliminary to consideration of any proposals, work on the Cuban bases must stop. Offensive weapons must be rendered inoperable, and further shipment of offensive weapons to Cuba must cease, all under effective international verification.
And finally, the eventual deal between the U.S. and the Soviet Union saw the missiles removed from Cuba under United Nations supervision and a pledge from the U.S. not to attack Cuba. Here's CBS News correspondent Robert Pierpoint before the eventual treaty.
We take you now to the White House. CBS News correspondent Robert Pierpoint reporting.
The White House has just issued the text of a formal letter from President Kennedy to Chairman Khrushchev, in which the president repeats much of the same message that he issued in a statement earlier today, accepting the Soviet proposals for a relief of the Cuban crisis. He says, in part to Chairman Khrushchev, I think that you and I, with our heavy responsibilities for the maintenance of peace, were aware that developments were approaching a point where events could have become unmanageable. So I welcome this message and consider it an important contribution to peace. The message, of course, that the president is referring to is the one from Premier Khrushchev earlier today, in which Khrushchev offers to withdraw all Soviet missile bases from Cuba under UN sponsorship and verification.
The Halloween season is typically scary only for children, but on October 30th, 1938, CBS News Radio listeners were sent into a frenzy listening to Orson Welles' reading of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. It was presented in the style of breaking news bulletin, which caused some listeners to think it was a real broadcast detailing an alien invasion. So don't worry, what you're about to hear is a work of fiction.
The Columbia Broadcasting System and its affiliated stations present Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the air in The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. Ladies and gentlemen, the director of the Mercury Theater and star of these broadcasts, Orson Welles.
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's, and yet as mortal as his own. We know now that as human beings busied themselves about their various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied, perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. With infinite complacence, people went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design, man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space. Yet across an immense ethereal gulf, minds that are to our minds as ours are to the beasts in the jungle, intellects, vast, cool, and unsympathetic, regarded this earth with envious eyes and slowly and surely drew their plans against us. In the 39th year of the 20th century came the Great Disillusionment. It was near the end of October. Business was better. The war scare was over. More men were back at work. Sales were picking up. On this particular evening, October 30th, the Crosley service estimated that 32 million people were listening in on radios.
For the next 24 hours, not much change in temperature. A slight atmospheric disturbance of undetermined origin is reported over Nova Scotia, causing a low-pressure area to move down rather rapidly over the northeastern states.
Beginning of the Gulf War against Iraq and 1991's Operation Desert Storm. Here's CBS News Radio's coverage before the U.S. launched major military action.
Now, direct from CBS News, this special report. This is Mitchell Krause, CBS News, New York. CBS News has learned that President Bush is planning a major military response to Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. And CBS News reporter Jim Stewart is at the Pentagon. And Jim, what can you tell us about this new Bush administration move?
Major air and ground forces are scheduled to leave for Saudi Arabia late this afternoon, part of a U.S. commitment there to defend that nation from invasion from Iraq.
CBS News Update. I'm Randy Riddle. Disturbing news this morning about the 2,500 Americans trapped in Kuwait. Standing by with a live report now from the State Department, CBS News correspondent Bill Plant.
CBS News has been told that Iraqi military authorities in Kuwait have instructed Americans and all Britons to assemble at various hotels. The Britons have expressed concern that this could mean an interning situation where their nationals would be taken and put away for the duration of the war.
The first shots fired in this Gulf interdiction effort came from the fast frigate Reed. It happened at about 4 p.m. today, Gulf time, when the Reed encountered an Iraqi tanker, challenged it by radio. When the tanker would not stop, the commander of the Reed got permission from higher authority to fire warning shots across the tanker's bow. He did so, not one, but 6 of them. The tanker apparently still did not stop. What happened then is not clear.
Israel saw retaliation from Iraq for joining the U.S.-led coalition. In our next clip, you may recognize the voice of current CBS News contributor Robert Berger, who was reporting for CBS at the time from Jerusalem.
Now, from the Oval Office, here is President Bush.
Just 2 hours ago, Allied air forces began an attack on military targets in Iraq and Kuwait. These attacks continue as I speak.
And this is Doug Poling, CBS News New York, with continuing coverage of the Persian Gulf War on the CBS radio network. Robert Berger in Jerusalem, our reporter there. Robert, are you there on the phone?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me? I'm speaking through a gas mask.
Yes, I can. Tell us what's happening.
Well, there has been an announcement on the radio that Israel has indeed come under a missile attack. Residents have been advised to put on their gas masks. I'm here in the room with my family. We're wearing gas masks. My 2 little girls are in enclosed tent kind of things. My wife and my mother-in-law and I are all wearing gas masks.
I am at an air base in eastern Saudi Arabia. We are now under attack. There have been incoming explosions at this base over the last several. The air raid sirens are on. Just a few minutes ago, the siren sounded briefly, and we began hearing explosions in several places here on the base. There were at least a half dozen explosions and the sounds of jet engines overhead.
That was another familiar voice, Scott Pelley. The closer we get to today, you may start to recognize these radio voices a little more. Now, as the U.S. made advances in Kuwait, Iraqi forces withdrew and set fire to oil wells there. Here's how they were described.
From this ship at this moment, looking towards Kuwait, I can see the entire coastline on fire. I have counted nearly 40 separate huge columns of flames and smoke rising thousands of feet above the shoreline, and beyond them the night sky glows with many, many more. It looks tonight as if all Kuwait is ablaze.
At 9 o'clock yesterday morning, there was bombardment from every direction, from a warship, presumably the Wisconsin or the Missouri out in the Gulf, from artillery and overhead from bombers. And under that cover, the tanks that had arrived from the west moved up along the sand wall, the 12-foot sand wall that's a mile from us along the border, and moved into position. So the front moved up. We, at first light this morning, can't see them. We don't know if they're still there. We don't know if they've moved over the night. But one thing we can tell you is that the bombardment last night, and it continues to this moment, has been exceedingly heavy, heavier than anything we have heard.
Iraq's occupation of Kuwait officially ended in February of 1991, bringing a celebration from the U.S., its allies, and residents of Kuwait.
People streamed into the streets, men, women, children by the thousands, screaming with joy. Resistance fighters and the Allied troops who entered the city at mid-morning, firing their weapons jubilantly into the air. The throngs carried hundreds of the black, white, red, and green Kuwaiti flags, waving them with abandon.
We take you to the spring of 1965. It was a troubled time in America, and President Lyndon Johnson, fresh off the deeply disturbing images of Bloody Sunday in Selma, and for those of you not old enough to know about that, that refers to the beatings suffered by protesters crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, en route, they hoped, for Montgomery. All this in pursuit of voting rights for African Americans, a cause Johnson was about to make his own with a speech to a joint session of Congress.
This is CBS News correspondent Dave Shoemaker with a CBS News special report on President Johnson's speech to a joint session of Congress. Tonight's appearance by the president on Capitol Hill was at the invitation of congressional leaders, at least formally, and is considered somewhat unusual. It's taken as a sign of Mr. Johnson's concern with recent events in Alabama, his desire for quick action on voting rights, and also perhaps his sensitivity to criticism that the administration has not been doing all it could in this area.
CBS News Radio continued its coverage, painting a portrait of a president about to lay down a rhetorical marker for the ages.
You have just heard House storekeeper Fishbake Miller announce the President of the United States. The President comes down the aisle, nodding to familiar faces, men that he's known most of his adult life here on Capitol Hill. He now mounts the podium, shakes hands with those standing just to the side, reaches up to shake hands with the Vice President and House Speaker McCormick.
CBS News Radio then carried the remarks, which echo today as the nation assesses anew what voting rights mean.
I speak tonight for the dignity of man and the destiny of democracy. I urge every member of both parties, Americans of all religions, and of all colors, from every section of this country, to join me in that cause. At times, history and fate meet at a single time, in a single place, to shape a turning point in man's unending search for freedom. So it was at Lexington and Concord. So it was a century ago at Appomattox. So it was last week in Selma, Alabama. There, long-suffering men and women peacefully protested the denial of their rights as Americans. Many were brutally assaulted. One good man a man of God, was killed. There is no cause for pride in what has happened in Selma. There is no cause for self-satisfaction in the long denial of equal rights of millions of Americans. But there is cause for hope and for faith in our democracy and what is happening here tonight. For the cries of pain and the hymns and protests of oppressed people have summoned into convocation all the majesty of this great government, the government of the greatest nation on earth.
Johnson went on, as presidents do on rare occasions, to lift our sights above the day-to-day to something higher, something deeper.
But rarely in any time does an issue lay bare the secret heart of America itself. Rarely are we met with a challenge, not to our growth or abundance, or our welfare or our security, but rather to the values and the purposes and the meaning of our beloved nation.
The date, March 15th, 1965. Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act August 6th, 1965. That was carried on CBS News Radio as well. The date, July 13th, 1977. The great New York blackout plunged the Big Apple into darkness and chaos all through the very hot and humid night in July. Among the damage, LaGuardia and JFK airports closed for hours. Thousands had to be evacuated from the subways. Nearly 1,400 stores were looted, more than 1,000 fires were set, and, interestingly, more than 3,700 people were arrested. And here is what it sounded like on CBS Radio in the earliest hours of a sweltering, inexplicable bout of urban darkness.
This is David Jackson, CBS News, New York. A major power blackout has hit New York City and surrounding communities. Mayor Abraham Beame has declared a public emergency. All off-duty police and fire officials have been told to report to duty stations. The plug was pulled on just about everyone in the city proper and some areas of the suburbs to the north and east. A spokesman for Consolidated Edison, the power company, says lightning struck major feeder lines somewhere between New York and Niagara Falls. The total blackout occurred at 9:34 Eastern Time tonight. The CBS News Broadcast Center is operating on emergency power. City authorities have told residents to remain where they are. Many elevators in high-rise buildings are not operating. New York airports, Kennedy and LaGuardia, have been closed to all traffic. They were operating on a limited basis earlier, but could not keep it up. Earlier this evening, CBS News reporter Doug Poling left the broadcast center to see what was happening in a darkened New York.
I'm standing on the corner of 57th Street and 8th Avenue, a very busy intersection here in Manhattan, where all the lights are out in the buildings and the street lights and the traffic signals, and the only lights that you can see are from automobiles, buses, and trucks. Traffic policemen are guiding cars through the intersections here, although a large traffic jam has developed, obviously because the normal traffic signal system is not working properly. There are a lot of people here on the streets in this hot, muggy night here in July. People just seem to be standing around looking, seeing what's happening. There goes an emergency vehicle of some kind with a red light on it, a van. There are quite a few emergency vehicles out here on the streets. As you can hear, the car is honking, people wanting to make sure they don't get hit in the darkness and in the confusion of not having any traffic signal system. Everybody seems to be just standing around curious. There doesn't seem to be anything in the way of panic or anything like that. People are just terribly interested in what's going on and, of course, anxious to have the lights go back. This is Doug Poling, CBS News in New York.
CBS News correspondent Jerry Landay lives on Roosevelt Island. That's in the middle of the East River between Manhattan and Queens.
I looked out across the river toward Manhattan, and I could see lights out all along the East River Drive, which is the express highway along the East River, and beyond, except for a hospital which has its own emergency power. When the voltage drop hit, it wasn't a sudden cutoff. You could imagine that people at great control boards were trying to limit or restrict the amount of the failure.
Jerry Neckman of CBS station WCBS in New York is keeping tabs on emergency services.
Insofar as police are concerned, there have been sporadic and light reports of looting. That's not considered an urgent situation. Thus far, most people have been behaving themselves during this emergency. The 4 to 12 tour, which goes off-duty at midnight, of course, is being held over. All off-duty police officers are being ordered to their nearest precinct, not the precinct where they work, but the precinct of residence. Mayor Beam has declared an emergency, and he's called together his agency heads, including Acting Fire Commissioner Stephen Murphy, Traffic Commissioner Theodore Karaguzoff, and Robert Lowe, the Environmental Protection Administrator. As far as the ambulance service is concerned, their problems have been traffic. They advise people to stay home in order to allow the streets for emergency vehicles. They had some problems with delays. They also had some radio problems. Some of their antennas and repeater systems were affected for a short time, but they report everything is working fine, that in the municipal hospitals there is full power. Some of the voluntary hospitals have had problems, but have switched to auxiliary power and are still operating.
That was Jerry Neckman, reporter of CBS station WCBS in New York. Without power, of course, there are no traffic lights in a city where driving is no picnic anytime. One description of the traffic tonight, bedlam, people everywhere. And air conditioning is out. And the temperature outside is about 90 degrees. There's been no word from Con Edison when power is expected to be restored. This is David Jackson, CBS News, New York.
By the way, the New York Mets were playing the Chicago Cubs that night at Shea Stadium. Lights went out in the 6th inning. The stadium organist, of all things, played Jingle Bells and White Christmas in July. The game was suspended, finished 2 months later. The Cubs won. The first anchor of an American TV news broadcast was not Walter Cronkite. It was Douglas Edwards. Edwards worked for CBS News Radio for 6 years before becoming America's first TV news anchor, presenting the CBS television news that was then renamed the CBS Evening News. Edwards did that from 1947 to 1962, when television was emerging as a powerhouse medium. That show ran for 15 minutes. Cronkite took over that broadcast in April of 1962. It was expanded to 30 minutes and became the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. And Cronkite became a figure of journalistic renown, but he stood on the shoulders of Douglas Edwards. Edwards remained at CBS doing considerable TV and radio work until April 1st, 1988. This is his last broadcast for CBS Radio. And you will note that the news in that broadcast about turmoil at the Justice Department, flare-ups in the Middle East, ring more than mildly familiar.
CBS News, I'm Douglas Edwards. Attorney General Edwin Meese says he feels gratified now that independent counsel James McKay has found no evidence to date that could lead to an indictment against him. Meese met with reporters in Washington within the hour to say that he has no intention of resigning and that nominees for top jobs in the Justice Department left vacant by resignations will be announced next week. Deborah Potter reports.
Meese said he has no intention of stepping aside based on what he called allegations by unscrupulous people. He conceded that the reason 2 of his top aides resigned this week was their concern that the investigation of Meese by a special prosecutor was hampering the work of the Justice Department. But he rejected charges that he has become a liability.
I doubt that it's very widely held, and I have had so many expressions to me personally to the contrary, so that I think that the action that I'm taking is in the best interest of the department, and I'm satisfied with that.
Meese said reports that he is preoccupied with the investigation and putting in very little time on the job are totally untrue, and he said he intends to carry on with his duties as long as the president wants him to. Deborah Potter, CBS News at the Justice Department.
Secretary of State Schultz is gearing up for another round of shuttle diplomacy in the Middle East. Schultz, now in Rome, is expected to arrive Sunday in Israel with a U.S. peace plan that has won few friends. Democratic Senator Alan Dixon of Illinois is urging Schultz to stay away from the PLO.
I think that the secretary, who I consider to be a reasonable, moderate, and fair-minded man, can make a great and important contribution by talking to the Israelis, the Syrians, the Jordanians, the Palestinians, others that we've indicated, and I don't want to see him get off on the wrong foot talking to the PLO, because that's surely a good way to turn off Israel, and I think it's a good way to turn off a lot of Americans as well.
The PLO has called on Palestinian leaders to boycott any meetings that involve Schultz. Security was tight in Israel as Jews began Passover and Christians marked Good Friday. Israeli officials reopened the occupied territories, and there were reports that 2 Arabs were killed in a clash with soldiers outside a West Bank mosque. The nation's unemployment rate fell to a decade-low 5.6% in March. The Labor Department says the drop is a sign that the workforce may have stopped growing. Jimmy Swaggart's future is again the topic of discussion in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. District officials of the Assemblies of God Church are meeting to review their 3-month suspension of Swaggart. The fiery preacher who says he'll return to the pulpit in May was told by national church officials to stop preaching for 1 year, this as punishment for his involvement with a prostitute. At 3 minutes past the hour, this is CBS News. Campo Corporation of Canada has won a bitter fight with Macy's over Federated Department Stores. Campo has agreed to pay more than $6.5 billion for the parent company of Bloomingdale's and Abraham and Straus stores. Campo also agreed to let Macy's buy 2 major divisions of Federated. President Reagan has begun a 10-day Easter vacation in California. Before leaving Washington, Mr. Reagan put pen to paper signing the new Contra aid bill. A White House spokesman says the president hopes the next round of peace talks, set to start soon, will help bring about democratic reforms in Nicaragua. End of an era in broadcasting. After 46 years in the business, a man who's graced the radio airwaves is packing it in and moving on. Today may be my last day, but I'm talking now about 68-year-old Simon Geller. For nearly 3 decades, he's run a one-man radio station in Gloucester, Massachusetts. This is CBS News. Douglas Edwards, CBS News.
Douglas Edwards died in 1990 at the age of 73. I would not be here without him. Almost none of us would. In our hyper-digitized world, it may be hard to appreciate, but radio news still has an immediacy and intimacy that is very hard to match. When big news breaks, it still takes time for TV to respond. Trust me, I have been deep inside the response blender when things are spinning at a breakneck pace and producers, cameras, and crew need to be stood up immediately. And it's still, in that immediacy, takes time. Radio is often faster and fresher, as it was in heartbreaking fashion the morning of February 1st, 2003. When the Space Shuttle Columbia re-entered Earth's atmosphere above Texas and Louisiana and en route to what was believed to be a scheduled touchdown in Florida.
This is a CBS News special report. The landing of Shuttle Columbia. I'm Peter King at the Kennedy Space Center.
Through Merritt Island Tracking Station.
Where Shuttle Columbia is supposed to be touching down just about 2 minutes from now. The voice you're hearing in the background is that of James Hartsfield at Mission Control in Houston. Let's listen in just for a second.
Now instructing controllers to
because there is a problem.
Contingency procedures and begin to follow those.
There is a problem. Nobody has heard a word from Shuttle Columbia in about 14.5 minutes, just after 8 o'clock, just after 9 o'clock, excuse me, Eastern Time.
No tracking data.
And there is no tracking data.
At the Merritt Island Tracking Station has been reported of any objects.
We don't know what has happened. This is not a good sign. And we are just going to stand by for a few seconds and see what happens. If you're just joining us, this is a CBS News special report. I'm Peter King, live at the Kennedy Space Center. Shuttle Columbia was supposed to be touching down here in about a minute, but we have not heard, or I should say NASA Mission Control has not heard a word from anybody aboard the shuttle since just after the top of the hour, 9 o'clock Eastern Time, 8 o'clock Central in Houston at Mission Control. They are not receiving any tracking data from Columbia. They have not received any voice communication from Columbia. And the trademark sonic booms, which we would normally have heard here in the Kennedy Space Center area, we have not heard a word. We have not heard a boom, nothing, no sign of tracking. They are trying with local radar here, the Mila Merritt Island Tracking Station, which would normally have acquired the signal from Columbia some 13 minutes or so ago, has not seen a thing.
All 7 astronauts aboard Columbia perished in that tragedy. It was the orbiter's 28th flight and the 113th for the Space Shuttle fleet. All Space Shuttle flights were suspended for 2 years in the aftermath of that catastrophe. That delayed construction of the International Space Station. There would not be another shuttle flight until July 2005, with modifications to avoid another re-entry thermal disaster, the one that doomed Columbia, as you heard it on CBS Radio News.
There is no precise moment when globalization began, but if you're looking for a moment very near the start, what you are about to hear is it. The year is 1955, and the world is a decade removed from the Allied victory in World War II, a monstrous conflict of never-before-seen carnage and slaughter. To avoid a third world war, the great powers tried something new, a meeting to explore trade relations, peace talks, and arms control. The city, Geneva. The players, America, the Soviet Union, Great Britain, and France. The sense of global anticipation, very high.
CBS Radio presents Crossroads at Geneva, a summary of the world's hopes and expectations as recorded on the eve of the Big Four Conference, with reports from Geneva, Paris, London, and Washington. We begin in New York with CBS correspondent Walter Cronkite.
It is now late afternoon in Geneva, Switzerland. The heads of the 4 most powerful nations on earth are there, waiting for tomorrow. When it comes, they will sit down to talk. What they say to each other may determine, for good or ill, the fate of all of us in the foreseeable future. But there is no way of predicting the outcome. We can only examine the attitudes and intentions that have gone into it, and of these we don't know very much. From the men at the top, we have heard only as much as they cared to reveal in the not very explicit language of diplomacy. President Eisenhower spoke for the United States just before he boarded his plane.
We shall be conciliatory because our country seeks no conquests, no property of others. We shall be tolerant because this nation does not seek to impose our way of life upon others. We shall be firm in the consciousness of your spiritual and material strength and your defense of the right. But we shall extend the hand of friendship to all who will grasp it honestly and concede to us the same rights, the same understanding, the same freedom that we accord to them.
The Russians have said much less, except to deny that they will be negotiating from a position of weakness. Foreign Minister Molotov has made only one reference to the Geneva Conference in recent weeks.
Мне кажется, вы хорошо знаете о том, что Советский Союз стоит за воссоединение Германии.
As for the Geneva Conference, the Soviet Union is in favor of the unification of Germany. It stands to reason that we're in favor of that unification on a peaceful and democratic basis.
What that basis would be, he did not say. Prime Minister Eden of Great Britain has been more specific.
We are not prepared to break up NATO. We will not be parted from the United States of America. We will work for the unification of Germany. Subject to these principles, our position is negotiable. I will tell you what I hope for. Our first aim would be to allay mistrust on either side.
Now, it's worth pointing out that France had deep and immediate concerns. You will hear references to Indochina and North Africa, which is shorthand for Vietnam and Algeria, places where French colonial control was already under pressure and soon to crack.
Collectively, the French have a definite attitude toward this meeting at the summit. And for an analysis of what that is, we'll call in CBS Paris correspondent Blair Clark, who is now in Geneva.
Probably more than any of the other 3 powers, France hopes some sort of relaxation in world tensions will come out of this conference. France has perhaps felt more than its allies the strain of the Cold War, the necessity to mount important forces in Europe while she is struggling to maintain her positions overseas. I need only cite Indochina and now North Africa. If it were possible, as a result of this meeting or its successors, to ease up a bit, there would be vast relief in a France that is still not fully recovered from the wars of the past. Therefore, hopes are high in France for the success of this meeting at the summit. But France has fears that go right along with her hopes. The main fear is about Germany, the ancient enemy now become an ally.
In the end, Geneva did not produce breakthroughs, but did create something meaningful, channels of dialogue and a default inclination to try diplomacy before war.
We have leaned into the voice of Edward R. Murrow in these tributes, and why not? Was anyone ever better at melding the observational precision of a writer with the measured, confident voice of a broadcaster? Answer no. Everyone else was tied for 5th, if that. I myself probably tied for 100th. Listen to the sound of victory in 1945.
This is London. Tonight, London is a city of song and celebration and thanksgiving. There are fireworks and parties. Air raid shelters are as remote as the covered wagon. Many words have been spoken and much drink has been consumed. London has been somewhat hysterical and still is. The organized killing has ended in Europe. The young men of many nations have suffered, sacrificed, and achieved victory. The coming months and years will reveal what will be done with that victory.
Organized killing. That's what World War II was. Only Murrow had the guts to say so. No hollow romanticizing this global catastrophe of blood and grief. Of course it mattered who won World War II, and Murrow knew that better than anyone. But because he was there from the start. Vienna, awaiting Adolf Hitler in 1938.
This is Edward Murrow speaking from Vienna. It's now nearly 2:30 in the morning, and Herr Hitler has not yet arrived. No one seems to know just when he will get here, but most people expect him sometime after 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. It's of course obvious after one glance at Vienna that a tremendous reception is being prepared. And we're planning to bring you an eyewitness account of Herr Hitler's entry into Vienna sometime tomorrow. We return you now to America.
When Nazi Germany, having by this time conquered much of Europe, set its bombing sights on London, Murrow was there for what became known as the Battle of Britain. From a rooftop observation post, he explained the feeling of death from the sky, the stalwart bravery of the British, a battle to survive.
Everything is quiet. For reasons of national as well as personal security, I am unable to tell you the exact location from which I'm speaking. Off to my left, far away in the distance, I can see just that faint, red, angry snap of anti-aircraft bursts against this steel blue sky. Now you'll hear two bursts a little nearer in a moment. There they are. That hard, stony sound.
There are no words to describe the thing that is happening. The courage of the people, the flash and roar of the guns rolling down the streets, the stench of the air raid shelters. In 3 or 4 hours, people must get up and go to work, just as though they had a full night's rest, free from the rumble of guns and the wonder that comes when they wake and listen in the dead hours of the night.
That reportage, irreplaceable, immortal, for all the right reasons. But if you remember nothing of this month's heartfelt tributes to CBS Radio News, remember what you are about to hear. Remember so that it may never be forgotten, minimized, or denied. Edward R. Murrow at the Nazi prison camp, Buchenwald.
When I entered, men crowded around, tried to lift me to their shoulders. They were too weak. Many of them could not get out of bed. As I walked down to the end of the barracks, there was applause from the men too weak to get out of bed. It sounded like the hand clapping of babies. As we walked out into the courtyard, a man fell dead. 2 others, they must have been over 60, were crawling towards the latrine. I saw it, but will not describe it. In another part of the camp, they showed me the children, hundreds of them. Some were only 6. One rolled up his sleeve, showed me his number. It was tattooed on his arm. D 6030 it was. The others showed me their numbers. They will carry them till they die. The children clung to my hands and stared. We crossed to the courtyard. Men kept coming up to speak to me and to touch me. Professors from Poland, doctors from Vienna, men from all Europe. Men from the countries that made America. We proceeded to the small courtyard. There were 2 rows of bodies stacked up like cordwood. They were thin and very white. Some of the bodies were terribly bruised, though there seemed to be little flesh to bruise. Some had been shot through the head, but they bled but little. It appeared that most of the men and boys had died of starvation. They had not been executed. But the manner of death seemed unimportant. Murder had been done at Buchenwald. God alone knows how many men and boys have died there during the last 12 years. As I left that camp, a Frenchman who used to work for Havas in Paris came up to me and said, "You will write something about this, perhaps." And he added, "To write about this, you must have been here at least 2 years. And after that, you don't want to write anymore." I pray you to believe what I have said about Buchenwald. I have reported what I saw and heard, but only part of it. If I have offended you by this rather mild account of Buchenwald, I am not in the least sorry.
I pray you to believe. Say it, Edward R. Murrow, you did, and you are to be believed. President Trump describes his 2 election victories as landslides. This is the sound of an actual presidential landslide. President Ronald Reagan's victory over Democratic nominee Walter Mondale in 1984. Now, before we play some of the CBS radio coverage, let us note Reagan's first job after graduating from Eureka College in Illinois was as a radio broadcaster in Davenport, Iowa.
Election night 84. I'm Reed Collins at our CBS News election headquarters in New York. The story began building early in the evening, and it has now grown to the point where Ronald Reagan has some 427 of the electoral seats, the electoral votes, and Walter Mondale still is looking at 3, those 3 coming from the District of Columbia. All of the states that have been decided thus far have gone into the Reagan-Bush column for what could be one of the bigger landslides in American electoral history.
The race was over before the polls closed in the West, but when that happened, the depth and breadth of the Reagan landslide became clearer.
CBS News. This is Charles Osgood at CBS News Election Night headquarters in New York. The polls have just closed in California, and bango, the state of California has gone, as has every other state that has cast its votes so far for Ronald Reagan. Mr. Reagan now has 474 electoral votes, according to our count. Walter Mondale has only the 3 from the District of Columbia. Ronald Reagan has 58% of the vote that's been cast, with 39% of the precincts reporting. Walter Mondale has 42%. In California, according to Deborah Potter, who is with the Presidential Victory Party in Los Angeles, things are all coming up roses. Deborah?
The president is expected in about an hour and a half at the victory celebration here in Los Angeles, where the band is practicing for the party. He's already taken a phone call of congratulations from Vice President Bush, and he told reporters he thinks this election signals a change in American politics.
I think the government has seen other policies that failed, and they've seen there's been a growing tendency to become more aware of the intrusiveness of the federal government and its continued expansion in power. And I think this is what's happened, and they see now that a different course works.
The president said he feels sorry for Walter Mondale. In his words, "I'm quite sure there isn't anything I can say to make him feel better." Now that the contest is over, the president said, "I hope we'll close ranks for the good of the country." Deborah Potter, CBS News, at the Reagan Victory Party in Los Angeles.
Reagan won 49 states and 525 electoral votes, the largest share of electoral votes ever won by a Republican then or since. He was also the only presidential nominee to sweep the New England states and the Deep South since 1820. Mondale won 1 state, his home state of Minnesota, by 3,761 votes, or less than 0.2%.
A few minutes ago, I called the President of the United States and congratulated him on his victory for re-election as President of the United States. Please. He has won. We are all Americans. He is our President, and we honor him tonight. Again tonight, the American people in town halls, in homes, in firehouses, in libraries, chose the occupant of the most powerful office on earth. Their choice was made peacefully, with dignity, and with majesty. And although I would have rather won, Tonight, we rejoice in our democracy. We rejoice in the freedom of a wonderful people, and we accept their verdict.
In no election since has a candidate won more than 500 electoral votes or the popular vote by double digits. These are the true margins of a landslide, as heard on CBS Radio News. Last night, we played the sound of a true Republican presidential landslide. Ronald Reagan, 1984. Tonight, a Democratic landslide, smaller by comparison to Reagan's, but historic nonetheless. Barack Obama, 2008.
CBS News, I'm Harley Carnes. This is history. CBS News now estimates the end of the race. California, Oregon, Washington, and Hawaii are estimated to go to Barack Obama when the votes are totaled. And those states put him over the 270 electoral votes needed to become the first African-American president of the United States. Live now to Chicago and Grant Park, where that teeming throng awaits their hero, CBS's Steve Kathan. Steve?
Well, Harley, this night of anticipation is now a night of euphoria. People shoulder to shoulder, the big moment arriving, people turning and hugging each other. People are clapping and jumping up and down, smiles all around. Children are on the backs of their parents, standing up and cheering. American flags are waving throughout this crowd here in Grant Park. People are jammed in here. And now this moment, when Barack Obama is projected as the next president of the United States, an explosion of joy in this park. I'm Steve Kathan, live in Chicago. CBS's Steve Futterman is with the McCain camp in Phoenix.
And Steve, a much different mood here. They are not showing the projections giving Barack Obama the election on the big screens in this ballroom. They continue to play country music in the background. This McCain supporter was asked if he will now give Barack Obama his support.
Obama? No. I'll be just like the Democrats are now with the Bush. So two could play the game.
John McCain's expected to address supporters probably in the next hour. Live at McCain headquarters in Phoenix, Steve Futterman, CBS News.
When Sarah Palin was named by John McCain as his running mate, there was much head scratching, followed by a lot of excitement, and then more head scratching. CBS News exit polling found she did not help the ticket after all.
6 in 10 voters say John McCain's choice of Sarah Palin as vice president was a factor in their vote, and 6 in 10 say Sarah Palin is not qualified to be president if necessary. On the other hand, nearly 7 in 10 say Joe Biden is qualified.
Polling analyst Fred Backus. It appears unlikely that the Democrats will manage any veto-proof majorities on Capitol Hill, but there are gains.
Thank you. Thank you for your hard work, your support, and especially your love. Serving you has been the honor of my life.
That's Republican Senator Elizabeth Dole in North Carolina on her way out, swept aside by the Obama movement. Democrats are expected to be a handful short of the 60-vote supermajority in the Senate. By the way, on Wall Street today, the Dow surged 305 points. The experts say it's relief because finally this election season is ending. The Nasdaq up nearly 54 points. And back in Chicago, where the celebration continues, Obama with at least 283 electoral votes, enough to call moving vans for relocation to Pennsylvania Avenue. This is CBS News.
Obama won 53% of the popular vote to McCain's 46%, the most lopsided victory for a Democrat since Lyndon Johnson's landslide victory over Barry Goldwater in 1964. Obama won 365 electoral votes to McCain's 173. He helped flip 9 states that voted Republican in 2004, and the roster of those states might surprise you considering where politics is today. Let me read them to you. Florida, Iowa, Indiana, Ohio, North Carolina, Nevada, New Mexico, Colorado, and Virginia. With Obama's coattails, Democrats picked up 8 Senate seats and 21 House seats, hence that election night euphoria you just heard. Now for our final CBS Radio clip of fame. But first, a note of thanks to Jamie Benson and Dustin Gervais. They lent considerable help to me pulling together CBS Radio archive clips. Also, my profound thanks to Max Losardo and Matt Parlapiano, who produced these tribute segments. It has been our honor to work on this and memorialize some of the best work of this journalistic powerhouse known as CBS News Radio. As we have learned following this journey, radio is immediate, raw, and present. It captures sights and sounds and shreds of information in those manic moments when news first breaks. Never, ever was that more true than September 11th, 2001. We are approaching the 25th anniversary of that harrowing day of atrocities in New York, Washington, and Shanksville, Pennsylvania. When it started, it was impossible to sense the enormity of what was to come.
CBS News, I'm Nick Young. A disaster in downtown New York City. A plane has crashed into one of the 2 World Trade Center towers. This man witnessed the aftermath.
I see a gaping hole at the top of the World Trade Center, almost to the top, not quite up there. I wasn't looking at it as I was driving towards it. I just heard a huge explosion.
WCBS radio helicopter traffic pilot Tom Kaminsky has more.
We are now looking at flames shooting out of the north side of number 1 World Trade Center, but there are at least some windows blown out and smoke billowing out of the opposite side.
One report quotes an eyewitness who says it was a twin-engine plane. It is unclear how many people were in the area of the crash or how many injuries there may be.
In those early moments, reporting indicated it was a wayward and possibly much smaller plane that hit one of the twin towers. Then another smashed into the other tower. As ever, radio reached for eyewitness accounts from the unfolding scene of destruction.
2 planes have hit each of the towers of the World Trade Center in New York City. This man not far away heard and saw the first.
I see a gaping hole at the top of the World Trade Center, almost to the top, not quite up there. I wasn't looking at it as I was driving towards it. I just heard a huge explosion.
That plane hit the upper part of one of the towers. Pictures from the scene showing flames and a lot of smoke pouring out of the building. Then an apparent second plane hitting the other tower. This man tried to help one victim who was nearby.
When I looked over, there was this guy that was on fire, so I kind of ran over, and I tried to put the fire out on him, and he was screaming, and I just told him to roll, and he said he can't.
This man saw the first plane hit the building.
It didn't look like there was any trouble at all with the plane. He didn't swerve at all. He just landed directly in the building. It was almost like a gray-black color in nature on the plane. He was like he wanted to fly into the building.
Again, 2 planes have apparently hit each of the 2 towers of the World Trade Center in New York City. There's been no word on casualties.
It seems inconceivable now, but in these earliest minutes, it was hard to imagine that this was a coordinated terrorist attack, or that planes had actually been hijacked, or that more was coming. But there were, in these dreadful early times, a sense that terrorism might be behind it, with one potential mastermind.
CBS News Update, I'm Nick Young. 2 airplanes have crashed into both towers of New York City's World Trade Center within minutes of each other, leaving gaping holes, flames licking up the sides of the 110-story buildings, and thick black smoke billowing into the air. This man, Steve Higgins, watched the second plane hit about 18 minutes after the first impact.
Another jet came from 903. Came from, let's say, South Ferry. It came up, and we saw the second plane, the second jet now. It wasn't just a small plane, hit the second tower.
There is no immediate word on injuries or fatalities. The White House has just announced that as of now, the crashes have triggered no national security alert. The possibility of a terrorist attack CBS News correspondent Jim Stewart.
There's no confirmation that this is a terrorist attack, number one, or number two, that it's Osama bin Laden involvement. But I can tell you right now, that is what they are thinking. That is the working premise.
Once again, no immediate word on injuries or fatalities. CBS News Update. I'm Nick Young.
Then the word hijacking began to be invoked, and the president became directly involved. Also, traffic patterns in New York, in the air and on the ground, began to change.
Both towers of the World Trade Center in New York City are burning, smoke pouring from them after two planes hit each tower. The impacts triggered explosions and fire. WCBS air traffic reporter Tom Kaminsky.
LaGuardia Airport has said there are two confirmed aircraft into the World Trade Center, and they want no one at all in this area. They are, in effect, if you can possibly picture this, cordoning off the entire area around the World Trade Center and around Manhattan.
The planes hit the towers about 18 minutes apart. Witnesses describing them as twin-engine planes. There's been no firm word on casualties. This man saw one of the planes hit and says it looked deliberate.
It didn't look like there was any trouble at all with the plane. He didn't swerve at all. He just landed directly in the building. It was like almost like a gray-black color in nature on the plane. He was like he wanted to fly into the building.
The FBI, according to the Associated Press, is investigating reports of a plane hijacking just before the crashes. CBS News correspondent Jim Stewart covers the Justice Department.
Right now, they are trying to determine whether, in fact, it was deliberate. They have no information they can share at the moment, and I get the sense that they're in the same mode that we are.
The White House says President Bush, who's now at an elementary school event in Florida, is aware of the incident, and he's heading back to Washington. CBS News Update. I'm Steve Kathan.
National radio relies on local radio, always has. WCBS was crucial to reportage here in New York, and as this murderous plot unfolded, Washington became part of the carnage, and WTOP in Washington was on the scene.
We have some indication of fire and smoke at the Pentagon right now. WTOP's Neil Augenstein. All right, we've just had some kind of line interruption there, but we're going to get that back up. Have we got that worked out? All right, the report we have is of fire and smoke at the Pentagon. We should tell you that we have gotten calls from people who live and work around the Pentagon who have told us that they have seen something that they have described as an explosion. This is information we have not been able to confirm. And we are trying right now to get Neil Augenstein, who has some line of view of this situation. And we are working through a problematic telephone problem for you right now.
Yes, there were problems that morning, communication and otherwise. The scale of the destruction was hard to comprehend in the moment. And that sense of disbelief would continue throughout the day. CBS Radio on the spot in the earliest and most perplexing moments of 9/11. One of the worst days in all of American history, reporting what happened as it happened. That has always been a hallmark, the hallmark of CBS News Radio. This show has been honored to remember and celebrate those achievements and that legacy. For more on all of this, CBS has produced a podcast tribute. Good night and good luck. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts.